If a man claims he's found a real queen, why does the entire kingdom stop breathing the moment his discarded queen walks in with nothing but a smile and a billionaire on her arm? The Aurelia Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled with impossible luxury that night, every surface polished to a blinding gleam, every detail a testament to the heights of Manhattan's social elite. Chandeliers rained diamonds overhead, orchestral strings filled the air, and the finest crystal glasses clinked with champagne older than most of the guests. On this night, the Ashcroft Foundation's annual charity gala was supposed to be a celebration of hope and generosity, a place where the wealthy gathered to prove their humanity with oversized checks and grand speeches. But under the surface, something cruel and electric was unfolding. The drama nobody could look away from, not even if they tried. At the very center of this glittering storm stood Mark Ashcroft, 35 years old, the city's most celebrated tech prodigy, a man who turned code into gold and ambition into a multi-million-dollar empire before he was old enough to rent a car. He wore his custom tuxedo like armor, every detail chosen to remind people how far he'd come and how high he planned to climb. But tonight, it wasn't his success that had the city's attention. It was the woman on his arm. Veronica Vale was a vision in gold, her dress cut dangerously low, shimmering with every movement she made. A Cartier choker glittered at her throat. Her hair was a copper waterfall down her back. She wasn't shy, she basked in the stares, letting them wash over her, drinking in the envy, the whispered curiosity. It was the look of a woman who knew she'd won. And in a way, she had. Tonight, she was not only Mark Ashcroft's guest, she was his declaration. His upgrade. His public humiliation to the woman he once promised to love forever. The crowd, old money, new money, and those who only wished they had it, buzzed with whispers that twisted through the room like smoke. "That's not his wife," someone muttered behind a bejeweled hand. "He actually brought her here, with the press everywhere?" The cameras swiveled, flashes stuttering as they caught every sly smile and lingering touch between Mark and Veronica. "Mark, you dog," joked a hedge fund manager, clapping Mark on the back as if this were all good fun. "Trading in for a queen, huh?" Mark grinned, the kind of grin that was meant to wound. "Not just a queen," he said loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "If the royals saw Veronica, they'd be jealous. She's real royalty tonight." Veronica laughed, a sound as sharp as broken glass, and leaned closer, pressing her hand possessively to his chest. The photographers snapped away, loving every second. Mark looked around, daring anyone to challenge him. He wanted this moment to last, a moment where he had all the power, where his choices were the only thing that mattered. But there was one thing Mark Ashcroft hadn't planned for. He didn't know that power, real power, can slip through your fingers the moment you believe you're untouchable. As the orchestra swelled into the opening notes of a waltz, the doors to the ballroom flew open with a crash that silenced the room. Heads turned. Laughter died mid-breath. The entire crowd, over 200 of the city's most important people, froze as a figure stepped inside. It was Elise Ashcroft. She stood framed by the light from the hallway, her presence at once familiar and shocking. For months, rumors had swirled about her disappearance from public life. Some said she was hiding, broken by the betrayal. Others whispered darker stories, that she was unwell or had been bought off to keep quiet. But the woman who walked into that ballroom was neither defeated nor lost. She was magnificent. Elise was 6 months pregnant, her form radiant in a deep blue velvet gown that accentuated her curves and her strength. Her hair was swept up, her makeup flawless, but it was her expression that made people gasp. There was no trace of the heartbreak the tabloids loved to speculate about. Instead, her chin was lifted, her eyes bright with something close to defiance, and her lips in a secretive, confident smile. But Elise wasn't alone. On her arm, as if from a dream or a page from the society columns, was Lucien Westcott, the city's most mysterious billionaire. Known for his reclusive genius, Lucien was rarely seen in public, his every appearance a headline. Tonight, he was there for one reason: Elise. He stood beside her with a quiet, protective strength, his hand resting lightly but possessively on her lower back, as if daring anyone to come near her. The effect was instant and devastating. The room erupted in 1,000 unspoken questions. Was this a power play? Was it love? Was Elise now under the protection of the one man even Mark Ashcroft wouldn't dare cross? Mark's face went gray, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Veronica stiffened, her grip on Mark's arm faltering as she watched her carefully crafted fantasy crack in real time. Then came the moment that would be replayed across social media, news broadcasts, and whispered about in beauty salons for years. Elise smiled. It was not the smile of a woman defeated. It was the billionaire's smile. A smile of hidden cards, of unstoppable strength, of someone who knew she held all the power now. "Good evening, everyone," Elise said, her voice steady, clear, and impossibly calm. "I hope I'm not too late." Mark couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe. Elise's entrance had shifted the balance of the room, the narrative of the night, the story of their lives. She wasn't the abandoned, humiliated wife anymore. She was the storm. And as the orchestra faltered, as cameras snapped, as the city held its collective breath, one thing became clear to every person in that room. The real queen had just arrived, and she was about to rewrite every rule. Who is Elise Ashcroft? On the surface, society thinks they know. To the tabloids, she was just another socialite swept up in a whirlwind romance, plucked from obscurity by Mark Ashcroft's ambition and charm. They called her the wife, the pretty face, the accessory. A role to be played at galas, red carpets, and charity auctions, always in the background, always smiling politely. Even now, as she stood in the center of the ballroom with every spotlight burning through her, whispers tried to reduce her to that same simple outline. But Elise Ashcroft was never simple, and never just a background character in someone else's story. In truth, the woman the city believed they knew was just one layer. The real Elise was forged through pain, sharpened by loss, and now, finally, awakened by betrayal. Before she ever became Mrs. Ashcroft, Elise Linton was a girl from nowhere, a little town in Indiana no one could find on a map. Her mother was a nurse, her father worked the assembly line at a dying car plant. Money was tight, but their tiny house was always filled with warmth, laughter, and lessons in resilience. When her dad lost his job during the recession, her mother worked double shifts to keep the lights on, sometimes coming home with hands so raw she couldn't hold a spoon. Elise learned early that life was not fair and nothing was ever truly secure. But she also learned the value of hard work and the quiet strength of keeping promises, no matter the cost. Elise was the kind of kid who studied under a flickering porch light, borrowing library books by the armful, determined to claw her way toward a future where she could give back what her family had sacrificed. She graduated top of her class, earning a full ride to Columbia University. That was her ticket out, a golden key to a life she thought only existed on television screens. New York City was a shock. Its speed, its noise, its ruthless hierarchy. For a long time, Elise felt invisible. She worked 2 jobs, shared a roach-infested studio with another scholarship kid, and ate cheap ramen so she could send money home. While her classmates partied, she hustled, interning at nonprofits, tutoring high schoolers, showing up at every networking event with her only nice dress pressed and spotless. It was at a charity fundraiser, one she had organized herself, that she first met Mark Ashcroft. He was magnetic, smart, driven, with a cocky grin and a vision that felt contagious. Elise fell for him fast, and for a while he fell for her too. Mark made her believe in fairy tales, trips to Paris, rooftop dinners, promises of forever. He said he loved her work ethic, her grit, the way she saw through his bravado. He said she made him want to be better. But fairy tales end, and this one ended the moment Mark's ambition outgrew his heart. As Mark's company exploded in value, so did his ego. Elise watched the man she loved become someone else. Hungry, restless, chasing validation from people who only cared about his money. The little gestures that once meant everything vanished. In their penthouse, Elise often ate alone. Nights out turned to board meetings, love notes turned to cold one-word texts. She tried to fight for their marriage, going to therapy, planning trips, holding on to the hope that the old Mark would return. But it wasn't until she found out she was pregnant that everything changed. At first, she thought it might save them. Mark seemed excited, even doting for a few weeks, making big plans for a nursery and talking about family vacations. But as the months passed and her belly grew, he grew distant, coming home later, picking fights, complaining about her slowing down. The final blow came not with words, but with silence. Elise started to see the texts from unknown numbers, the late-night calls he'd answer in the other room. She saw his eyes glaze over when she spoke, his phone clutched like a lifeline. Then, one rainy afternoon, she saw a photo on social media. Mark, laughing with Veronica Vale at an art opening, his arm around her waist, the same easy affection he once saved for Elise. That was the day Elise stopped waiting to be saved. She moved out of their bedroom. She stopped fighting for his attention. Instead, she began fighting for herself and for the life growing inside her. It wasn't easy. The headlines hurt. Friends she thought she could count on disappeared, worried their own places at the Ashcroft table might be threatened. Elise's parents wanted her to come home, but she refused. She was done running. She would finish this story on her own terms. What nobody knew, what Mark never bothered to ask, was that Elise was more than his wife. While Mark chased headlines, Elise had quietly built her own legacy. The nonprofit she started in college had grown into a national network for at-risk youth, supported by several anonymous donors. She'd used her skills to invest in startups that gave back, and she held seats on 3 different philanthropic boards. She didn't need Mark's money or his name. What she needed was her dignity, and to protect her child from the toxicity that nearly destroyed her. That's why, tonight, she came back. Not to win Mark or to outshine Veronica, but to reclaim her narrative. To show her child, someday, that their mother stood tall in the face of betrayal and never bowed to cruelty. Standing in the ballroom center, the world watching, Elise let her past fuel her courage. She wasn't here as the wife. She was here as herself. Elise Linton Ashcroft. Daughter, advocate, survivor. The real royalty was never about the crown, or the dress, or the man at your side. It was about knowing your worth, even when others tried to erase it. The Aurelia Hotel's ballroom wasn't just a party venue. It was a living monument to the egos and ambitions of New York's wealthiest. Tonight, its gilded walls held more than charity. Within them, fortunes were flaunted, secrets traded, and reputations quietly made or ruined. The annual Ashcroft Foundation Gala was less about philanthropy than it was about power. Who held it, who wanted it, and who could lose it all with a single misstep. The ceiling soared high overhead, draped in golden velvet and studded with crystal chandeliers that cast fractal rainbows over the sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Waiters, trained to be invisible, glided between marble-topped cocktail tables, balancing trays of caviar blinis and glasses of Dom Perignon. String quartets played modern pop songs disguised as classical, music to fill silence, but never drown out the deals and gossip that truly fueled the night. Everywhere Elise looked, she saw stories. There was the real estate mogul, dancing with the senator's wife, 2 families whose fortunes were locked in a silent, ruthless battle over riverfront land. In another corner, 3 rival CEOs gathered, their smiles too sharp, their laughs forced, every word a veiled threat. The city's wealthiest heiress, barely 22, swirled by in a couture gown, her arm candy twice her age, his own eyes darting over the crowd in search of richer prey. No one here was innocent. Every compliment was an audition. Every smile was a negotiation. Even the so-called charity part of the evening, the speeches, the oversized donation checks, was just window dressing, a way for the powerful to congratulate themselves and sharpen their claws for next year's battle. Only a handful of people truly cared about the causes, and Elise had learned the hard way that caring too much made you a target. But as she walked deeper into the ballroom, flanked by Lucian Westcott, she realized something had changed. It wasn't just that her ex-husband was parading his mistress for the world to see. It was the hunger in the air, the way the entire room leaned in, sensing the possibility of a scandal greater than any business deal. There was blood in the water, and these sharks could smell it. At the bar, a junior partner at Mark's company whispered to a tech blogger, "You know she used to be nobody, right? All that charity work, just for show." The blogger made a note, eyes glittering with the thrill of a potential headline. At the next table, a fashion influencer posted a photo of Elise, adding a catty caption, "When your ex shows up with real money and you're left holding your pride." None of them knew the truth. Not yet. Mark watched all of it, sweat beading at his brow despite the cold air conditioning. For years, he'd owned this room. His jokes were repeated the next day in boardrooms, His opinions echoed on cable news. Now, though, the spotlight wasn't his to command. The presence of Lucian Westcott changed everything. Rumor had it Luce's personal fortune dwarfed even Mark's. And unlike Mark, Lucian never needed to prove himself. He didn't chase headlines, he wrote the checks that controlled them. Elise could feel the pressure of 200 pairs of eyes as she and Lucian made their way toward the center of the ballroom. People parted before them, some with genuine respect, others with calculation, wondering what this alliance meant. Was Lucian here to invest in Mark's next startup, or to destroy it? Was Elise's baby really Mark's, or had something far more complicated taken root during their separation? As she passed Mark and Veronica, the tension was a living thing, so thick it nearly choked her. Veronica clung to Mark's arm, but her smile was fading, replaced by a tight, uncertain glance at Lucian. The press hovered, sensing the shot of the year was seconds away. "Elise, darling," drawled the gala's hostess, society doyenne Marian Aldridge, sweeping over in a swirl of lilac silk. "You look radiant. We were all just saying how much we've missed you at these events." Her eyes flicked quickly to Elise's belly, then to Lucian's hand at her back. "And Mr. Westcott, what a coup for our little party." Lucian nodded, his face unreadable. "It's a beautiful event, Marian. Elise insisted I see it for myself. Well, we're lucky to have her, aren't we?" Marian's voice was just a bit too loud for the benefit of the crowd. "Some people," her gaze darted to Mark and Veronica, "forget that grace under pressure is the mark of true royalty." Mark's jaw twitched. Veronica looked away. As Marian moved on, Lucian leaned in, voice just for Elise. "You're doing well. They're more afraid of you than you know." Elise swallowed, her pulse racing. "I don't want them to be afraid. I just want them to see me." Lucian smiled softly. "They will." Across the room, Mark gripped his glass so hard his knuckles turned white. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. Veronica tried to comfort him, but he barely noticed. The plan was simple: show off his new life, show the world he had moved on to something younger, but flashier, more royal. But now everyone was staring at Elise, and no one was looking at him. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Elise could see her reflection in the mirrors behind the orchestra. Strong, determined, a woman who would not be erased. She stood up straighter, knowing her every move was being judged, measured, envied. As the auctioneer called the next item, a private villa in Santorini, Elise smiled. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to win anyone back. She was here to remind the world that grace under fire is the truest mark of power. The real royalty in this room wasn't defined by money, mistresses, or even last names. It was defined by dignity, the kind you can't buy or steal. And as the bidding soared and the whispers grew louder, everyone began to realize this gala would be remembered, but not for the reasons Mark had hoped. Tonight, the world was watching. Tonight, the balance of power had shifted. Tonight, a new queen had arrived, and her reign was just beginning. Beneath the glossy surface of Mark Ashcroft's charm, his smooth smile, sharp tuxedo, and effortless small talk, lurked a hunger that was never truly satisfied. He wore the face of the prodigy, the golden boy who could do no wrong. But everyone who ever got close enough learned the truth. Mark's loyalty was as thin as a credit card and twice as cold. Ambition always came first. Relationships, partnerships, even family, all were tools to be used and discarded if they got in the way of his next conquest. Once, when Mark had first started out, his drive had been inspiring. He rose from nothing, surviving on ramen noodles and sleepless nights, believing his intelligence and vision could change the world. And for a while, they did. But with every new success, his humility shrank, replaced by an insatiable need to win, no matter the cost. He stopped listening to advice. He stopped hearing no. Every new deal, every magazine cover, every expensive toy was proof that he was more than just a lucky kid from nowhere. When Mark married Elise, some called it a fairy tale. Others, more cynical, called it a calculation. Elise was beautiful, sure, but more importantly, she was good press. She softened his image. She made him look like the kind of man who valued love and community, not just profit and power. For a while, Mark played along, enjoying the perks of the perfect couple persona. But as the years rolled on, the act began to chafe. He saw Elise's empathy and generosity as weaknesses, not strengths. When she turned down fancy galas to visit soup kitchens or skipped exclusive parties for late-night board meetings with her nonprofit, he felt slighted. He wanted a wife who would smile for the cameras, not challenge his worldview or remind him of where he came from. Slowly, resentments grew. Every time Elise succeeded on her own, Mark felt threatened instead of proud. Enter Veronica Vale. Veronica was the antidote to everything Mark thought he disliked about Elise. Where Elise was subtle, Veronica was showy. Where Elise put others first, Veronica demanded to be first. She was bold, brash, and knew exactly how to make a man like Mark feel invincible. She didn't care about charity or appearances unless there was something in it for her. For Veronica, attention was currency, and scandal was merely the price of entry. She had spent most of her 20s hopping from one high roller to another, always upgrading, never looking back. She perfected the art of being exactly what each man wanted, for as long as it suited her. When she met Mark at an after-party for a tech launch, she saw potential, not just for luxury, but for infamy. She was tired of being someone's secret. With Mark, she wanted the spotlight. Their relationship was explosive from the start. Veronica wasn't content to remain the other woman forever. She pushed Mark to be bolder, to stop hiding her, to make a statement, to prove to the world and Elise that he had traded up. She fueled his ego, whispering that he deserved better, deserved someone who truly understood his ambitions. Mark, already drifting from Elise and their unborn child, let himself believe it. Behind closed doors, their affair was built on games. Veronica would tease him about his marriage, joke about how Elise would never fight back, taunt him with fantasies of a future where Mark ruled the tech world and she reigned as his queen. "She's weak, Mark," Veronica would say, her voice syrupy with disdain. "You need a woman who makes headlines, not one who hides behind causes. I can make you unstoppable." It was Veronica's idea to go public at the gala. She wanted to prove to the world, and especially to Elise, that she had won. She picked out her own dress, planned her entrance, even called a few paparazzi with anonymous tips to ensure maximum coverage. Mark hesitated, knowing the move was risky, but Veronica was relentless. She pressed until he caved. Tonight, as they stood in the ballroom, Veronica watched the drama unfold with satisfaction, at least at first. She loved the looks from other women, the shocked gasps, the rush of power that came from being envied and feared. But she also noticed how quickly the room changed when Elise walked in. Suddenly, Veronica wasn't the main event. Elise's presence stole the air from the room, and Lucien Westcott's appearance made Veronica's diamond necklace feel like costume jewelry by comparison. Mark, for his part, was spiraling. He tried to recover, cracking jokes and making small talk, but everyone could see he was rattled. He blamed Elise for ruining his moment, never once considering his own choices had led him here. He turned on Veronica, snapping at her for little things, a misplaced drink, a smudged lipstick. His frustration growing as the night spun out of his control. Veronica, never one to accept being overshadowed, tried to claw her way back to the center. She whispered cruel remarks about Elise to anyone who would listen, implying that Elise had only landed Lucien as a rebound, that the pregnancy was a trap, that Elise was nothing without Mark's name. The more threatened she felt, the nastier her comments became. But for all their scheming, both Mark and Veronica were now trapped by their own arrogance. They believed public humiliation would destroy Elise. Instead, they found themselves exposed, petty, desperate, and shockingly outmatched. The real tragedy for Mark was that he couldn't see his own downfall coming. He'd spent years comparing women as if they were prizes to be won, never realizing the real prize was the one he let slip away. Veronica's ruthlessness, once intoxicating, now felt like a cage. As Elise moved through the crowd, poised and unbothered, Mark and Veronica watched helplessly, their carefully built facade cracking with every step she took. The power in the room had shifted, and for the first time, Mark realized what true royalty looked like. And it was nothing like Veronica Vale. Tonight, everyone would see the truth. The villains had written their own undoing. The world was watching, and this time, nobody would look away. The room was a powder keg, waiting for a single spark. All night, the tension had built. Sideways glances, nervous laughter, conversations that faded mid-sentence as eyes darted toward the unspoken spectacle at the center of the ballroom. Everyone was waiting for the drama to break, for the moment that would become the stuff of whispered legend. That moment arrived during the night's most public ritual, the presentation of the Humanitarian Visionary Award. Mark Ashcroft's foundation sponsored the honor every year, always making sure his name was front and center. It was his favorite way to play the hero in front of cameras, to remind everyone he was the architect of his own empire, and to display the perfect family image. Only this year, the perfect family was missing. Mark's wife wasn't by his side. The Mistress was. When the MC called Mark's name, applause rippled across the hall. Mark grinned, shoulders squared, pulling Veronica tighter to him as he strode to the stage. Elise watched from across the room, feeling each step like a bruise. She remembered standing next to Mark on that stage last year, so proud, so sure they were building something real. Now the memory felt like a lie. At the podium, Mark began his speech, voice slick with false humility. "Thank you, everyone. This night is about giving back, about the power of love and support." He looked pointedly at Veronica, who flashed a victorious smile for the cameras. The crowd shifted, some clapping, some cringing. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his own spotlight. Then it happened. From the edge of the crowd, Marian Aldridge, the event hostess, called, "We'd love to have the Ashcroft family join us on stage." Her words, innocent on the surface, carried a razor's edge. For a moment Mark froze. He glanced at Veronica, then at the crowd, then, unthinkably, at Elise. Time stretched. The room fell silent, except for the clicking of cameras. Elise's heart thudded so loud she was sure the whole world could hear it. The moment was excruciating, an invitation laced with humiliation. Elise wasn't Mark's family anymore, not in the way the city expected, and Veronica knew it. Veronica seized her chance. She strutted up the steps beside Mark, looping her arm through his. The photographers surged, flashes exploding as if on cue. Mark, caught off guard, let her, and together they stood beneath the glittering lights, him, grinning tightly, her, beaming with the confidence of someone who believed they'd won. Then from behind, Marian beckoned again. "Elise, dear, please join us. You'll always be family to the foundation." Elise hesitated. Every eye in the room was on her. She could have melted away, disappeared into the crowd, but she didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked forward, Lucien by her side, her posture unbreakable. Her steps were measured, elegant, each one a refusal to let shame define her. As Elise reached the edge of the stage, Mark's discomfort was palpable. He tried to mask it with a laugh, but his voice cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all know my..." He stumbled, not sure what to call Elise now that the world knew too much. "My former wife, Elise." The word former hung in the air, a cruel dagger. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Veronica's face twisted into a smirk of victory. Lucien stepped in, his voice calm and powerful. "Elise is the heart of every cause in this room. Her work is the reason many of us are here tonight." His words were an anchor, and Elise seized the moment. She turned to Mark, meeting his gaze with steady defiance. "Thank you, Mark, for reminding us all that actions speak louder than words." The cameras caught it all, the tension, the pain, the subtle war waged in micro-expressions. Social media would replay this moment in endless loops. Elise, beautiful and bruised, refusing to be erased. Mark, exposed for what he was. Veronica, smug but suddenly diminished by the force of Elise's presence. The real humiliation wasn't Elise's, it was Mark's. He wanted to show the world he'd traded up, that he'd won. But as the minutes passed, it became clear who truly had the power. Elise was dignified, supported, and admired. Mark and Veronica looked petty, desperate, and mean. But as she stepped down from the stage, Elise's composure cracked. She made her way to a quiet corner, fighting tears that threatened to spill over. She pressed a hand to her belly, seeking strength, whispering a silent promise to her unborn child. "I will not let this break me. I will not let him define me." Her heartbreak was raw, deep, and impossibly lonely. She felt exposed, betrayed not just by Mark, but by the world that so easily cast her aside. The humiliation stung, but even as it burned, a new resolve took root. She would not give her pain away. She would not let this be the end of her story. Across the room, Mark tried to salvage the night, but the damage was done. Whispers followed him, not admiration, but pity and contempt. Veronica clung to his arm, but the mask was slipping. She saw now that Mark's power had limits, that the world could turn against her as quickly as it had turned against Elise. For Elise, the walk from that stage back into the crowd was the longest she'd ever taken. Every step was heavy, but she refused to hide. People watched her, some with sympathy, some with judgment, all with curiosity. But Elise's head stayed high. She was no longer just the betrayed wife. She was something stronger, fiercer. She was the woman who survived the fire. And as the gala rolled on, as laughter returned and the orchestra played, everyone knew. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. Tonight, humiliation was supposed to break Elise. Instead, it made her unforgettable. The ballroom lights faded into a blur as Elise walked away from the crowd, her ears ringing with the echoes of polite applause and the not-so-polite whispers that followed her every move. She made it as far as the quiet hallway behind the coat room before her composure faltered. Here, away from the lights and the flashbulbs, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The pain was immediate, sharp, and raw. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, as if she could hold her heart together by force of will. Her body shook, a wave of exhaustion threatening to drag her down to the polished marble floor. All her resolve, her poise, the proud way she'd held her head in that room full of predators, none of it could keep the loneliness at bay now. It was supposed to be different, she thought. She had always known that Mark was flawed. But she believed she could love him through the rough edges, that their shared history would anchor them against every storm. She'd forgiven him so many times, for late nights, broken promises, even the first hints of betrayal, clinging to the hope that if she just tried harder, he would remember the man he used to be. Tonight shattered that illusion forever. He hadn't just left her, he'd erased her, replaced her with someone younger, flashier, and cruel enough to enjoy the humiliation. He did it in public, with an audience, with cameras rolling, and strangers taking notes for tomorrow's gossip. Mark hadn't simply ended their marriage. He'd made sure everyone knew that she was disposable. Elise sank onto a velvet bench tucked into a shadowy alcove, her hand protectively cradling her belly. Her baby. The one life she still felt tethered to, the only thing giving her strength. Tears spilled over, silent and unstoppable. She felt a strange, sharp shame. Not just for being betrayed, but for the ways she'd betrayed herself, shrinking to fit inside Mark's world, quieting her own dreams, giving up pieces of her soul for someone who never bothered to look back. "Are you okay?" The voice was gentle, hesitant. Lucien Westcott had found her, concern etched on his usually impassive face. He didn't try to sit beside her right away, sensing she needed space. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with a patience most people lacked. She tried to answer, but her voice broke. I don't know," she whispered. Lucien nodded, as if this was the only honest thing to say. "You were extraordinary tonight. Don't let them convince you otherwise." His words only made the tears come harder. Elise pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, willing herself to stop, but the dam was broken. She cried for everything. The lost years, the betrayal, the hollow friendships that faded as soon as her marriage fell apart. She cried for the child who would never know the family she'd dreamed of. For the woman she'd almost become before Mark's shadow covered her light. Lucien finally sat beside her, silent and steady. He didn't offer false comfort or empty promises. He simply existed beside her, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. "It's not weakness to break down," he said softly. "It's just honesty. You endured more tonight than most people ever will." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Elise's tears slowed, her breaths coming in shaky hiccups. She wiped her eyes, suddenly embarrassed. "Everyone saw it, didn't they?" she said bitterly. "They all saw me get humiliated. I tried so hard to be strong. But, God, I feel like a fool." Lucien shook his head. "What they saw was a woman with more courage than anyone in that room. You stood your ground. You didn't run. That takes guts Mark and Veronica will never understand." The words comforted her more than she expected. But doubt lingered, sharp and insistent. "What if they're right?" Elise whispered. "What if I am just weak? What if I can't do this alone?" Lucien's eyes softened. "Then let yourself be weak for tonight. Tomorrow is a new day. You don't have to be the hero every moment." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could rebuild, that she could be more than the sum of her heartbreak. But it felt impossible. She saw herself through Mark's eyes. Inconvenient, embarrassing, forgotten. Every cruel word, every cold shoulder echoed in her mind. What if she really was unlovable? What if all she'd built was just a mask, and underneath she was only a broken, abandoned wife? Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. "Call me when you can. We love you. We're proud of you." Elise couldn't reply. Not yet. She was too raw, too exposed. Lucien finally broke the silence. "Elise, do you know why I came tonight?" She shook her head. "Because I believe in you," he said simply. "Not as Mark's wife, not as the woman people whisper about. I believe in you, Elise. You have power. You have dignity. Even on your worst night, you are more than they'll ever be." She didn't answer, but the words settled inside her like seeds. Maybe they'd grow in time. For now, she just needed to survive the night. When Lucien left her to collect herself, Elise sat alone for a while longer. She looked down at her belly, tears drying on her cheeks. She whispered a promise to her baby. "We'll get through this. I'll protect you. I'll find my strength again, even if I have to build it from scratch." The pain was real. The heartbreak was brutal. But beneath it all, something stubborn and bright refused to die. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just surviving Mark's betrayal. She was surviving her own self-doubt. And as the night crept toward dawn, Elise wiped her tears, stood up, and began to imagine what rising from the ashes might look like. The night after the gala stretched on in a haze of exhaustion, but something inside Elise had changed. She lay awake, replaying every humiliation, every cruel smile, every look of pity. But for the first time in months, anger and determination overpowered her heartbreak. She was done letting Mark, Veronica, or anyone else define her story. She was done hiding who she really was. Most of the world saw Elise as the good wife, polite, nurturing, background material. Even her closest friends only knew part of the truth. She'd kept her greatest secret hidden for years, out of loyalty, out of fear, and sometimes out of a quiet pride. Mark never cared enough to ask about her work, her investments, or her network. To him, Elise's value ended with her last name and her ability to smile for the cameras. He'd never wondered how she funded her nonprofit's explosive growth, or why invitations to major tech conferences kept appearing in her mailbox long after she stopped being Mrs. Ashcroft, in any meaningful sense. But the truth was, Elise had built her own empire, quietly, meticulously, in the shadow of Mark's bluster. What started as a way to keep her mind occupied during his late nights grew into something extraordinary. She took online business courses, taught herself about venture capital, and poured her inheritance, left by her grandmother, a quietly legendary investor, into a portfolio of startups and social enterprises. She backed female founders, tech innovators, and organizations that focused on real change, not just profit. Her holdings were vast, diversified, and, thanks to her determination, nearly invisible. She never needed Mark's money, never relied on his name. She had quietly become one of the most influential angel investors in New York without a single headline to her own name. Elise's power was subtle but unshakable, and tonight she was ready to step into it fully. The morning after the gala, Lucien Westcott sent a single, discreet text. "Ready when you are." The message was simple, but it meant everything. Lucien knew the full truth. In fact, he'd been one of Elise's first business mentors. He'd admired her keen eye for talent and her refusal to settle for anything less than genuine impact. Unlike Mark, Lucien respected power when it was earned, not when it was paraded. Their partnership was more than friendship. It was a bond forged in mutual respect and strategy. Elise texted back, "Let's do this." She spent the next hours in quiet preparation. She contacted her attorney and gave him instructions to initiate a series of financial moves that would shift the balance of power in ways Mark would never see coming. She called a meeting of her foundation's board, no longer as Mark's ex but as Elise Linton, founder and chair. She reconnected with journalists she trusted, agreeing to interviews under her own name on her own terms for the first time. The next day, Mark woke up to a storm of emails, news alerts, and frantic calls from his PR team. Social media was ablaze, but this time it wasn't about his flashy new relationship. It was about a mysterious new investor group backing a slate of social tech startups, projects that directly threatened several of Mark's biggest ventures. At first, Mark thought it was coincidence. Then, as he scrolled through the press releases, he saw her name, Elise Linton. He stared, disbelief turning to rage. He called her, furious, demanding an explanation. Elise answered, her voice calm and clear. "I told you, Mark, actions speak louder than words. I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to build something better." "You can't do this," he shouted. "You're nothing without my name. You're just—" "I was never just your wife," Elise said, her tone icy. "I have resources, I have allies, and I have nothing left to lose." Mark sputtered, his confidence crumbling. For the first time, he realized Elise wasn't powerless. She was dangerous, in the best possible way. His greatest fear wasn't just losing her, but realizing she never needed him at all. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with the news. Lucian's support only heightened Elise's profile, and within days she was fielding offers from major investors, CEOs, and politicians eager to align with her vision. The press reframed her narrative from jilted wife to mysterious mogul, a woman who turned pain into power, humiliation into strategy. Even Veronica, once smug and triumphant, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The city's elite whispered that she was just a pretty distraction, while Elise was the real force. She saw invitations dry up, endorsements drop, and her social media following dwindle. Mark grew distant, blaming her for his losses. The relationship that began with a public spectacle ended in private bitterness. For Elise, however, this was only the beginning. She stood at the top of her own world now, no longer hiding her strength, no longer apologizing for her ambition. She realized that her vulnerability was not weakness, it was the root of her courage. The scars from betrayal became the foundation of her rebirth. Late that night, Elise stood at the window of her new office, city lights glittering below. Lucian joined her, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "You did it," he said, pride warming his normally reserved expression. "We did it," Elise corrected softly, "but there's still so much to do." "Are you ready for what comes next?" Lucian asked. Elise smiled, her reflection shining with the confidence of someone who had survived the fire. "For the first time in a long time, I am." And in that moment, Elise felt it, hope, fierce and unbreakable. The future was hers to write, and she was ready to write it in bold, unignorable ink. Elise had always believed real change began inside, not out. But as the news cycle shifted, as her story made headlines and her phone buzzed with opportunities, she realized it was time for the world to see her transformation with their own eyes. Not just through press releases or whispered rumors, but in person. If she was going to reclaim her place, she'd do it with the kind of confidence that couldn't be ignored, doubted, or pitied. So, she called Mia, her oldest friend from college, now a rising stylist in Manhattan. Mia had watched Elise survive the darkness, offering steady support during every heartbreak. She knew, more than anyone, that tonight's transformation wasn't about vanity. It was about power, about finally wearing on the outside what Elise had discovered on the inside: courage, dignity, and purpose. The process began quietly in Elise's penthouse. Mia arrived with racks of clothing, boxes of shoes, and a glint in her eye that meant she'd planned for this day all along. Together, they sifted through outfits, searching for the perfect look, one that would silence any lingering doubts about Elise's future. "No more safe choices," Mia declared, holding up a tailored, sapphire blue pantsuit with sharp shoulders and a dramatic silk blouse. "You're not just coming back. You're rewriting the rules." Elise smiled, slipping into the suit, feeling its weight settle over her like new armor. Mia worked her magic, hair swept back, makeup glowing but strong, diamond studs in her ears, and a pair of killer heels that made her stand taller than she ever had with Mark. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, and that was exactly the point. As Mia finished, she stepped back, hands on her hips. "You're not the same woman who left that gala. Let them see it." Elise looked at her reflection, heart pounding. For the first time, she saw not a victim, not a shadow of her old life, but a leader. A woman who had survived the storm and come out unbroken. It wasn't just about the clothes. Over the next week, Elise embraced every aspect of her transformation. She attended board meetings in person, head high, voice clear. She spoke to her foundation's staff, sharing her vision with honesty and hope, promising to fight harder for every child, every family, every underdog. She took interviews, correcting the narrative the tabloids tried to twist. "I'm not here because I was left behind," she said on a national morning show. "I'm here because I never left myself behind." The world noticed. Social media, which once buzzed with rumors and pity, now exploded with praise. Elise Returns trended for days. Her style and courage celebrated everywhere, from fashion blogs to business podcasts. Young women sent messages of gratitude, mothers posted stories of their own struggles, and Elise's inbox overflowed with invitations from CEOs, investors, and even movie producers. The new power at her fingertips was electrifying. But the most important transformation was still inside. Elise stopped apologizing for her ambition. She started asking for what she wanted, and more importantly, she started expecting respect, not permission. At the next major networking event, she walked in alone, her head high, her presence impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for the room to take notice. Conversations hushed as she entered, her name whispered in tones of awe, admiration, and even a little fear. She greeted allies and former enemies alike, shaking hands, exchanging cards, offering advice. When Mark and Veronica arrived, late, flustered, and unsure, they found themselves pushed to the sidelines. This was Elise's night, and everyone knew it. As the evening progressed, Lucian Westcott found her by the terrace. "You look powerful," he said simply. Elise grinned, not coy or shy, but bold. "That's because I am." They toasted to new beginnings, and Elise felt something shift. No longer haunted by old betrayals or insecurities, she was surrounded by people who believed in her vision, and more importantly, she believed in herself. Later, after the event, Mia joined her at a quiet cafe. "You know they're terrified of you now, right?" Mia teased, squeezing Elise's hand. "They should be," Elise replied with a mischievous smile. "I'm not here to play small." The two friends laughed, the sound genuine and free. For Elise, this was more than just a makeover. It was a declaration. She was done shrinking, done living in anyone's shadow, done letting fear dictate her story. Every scar, every heartbreak, every painful lesson had made her stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. She realized then that true transformation wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning it, learning from it, and building something better. She would always carry the pain of Mark's betrayal, but she no longer let it define her. Instead, she used it. Fuel for the empire she was building, inspiration for the young women watching her, and a reminder that survival could be beautiful. As she walked home that night beneath the city's lights, Elise felt unstoppable. She was a mother, a leader, and a force the world would never underestimate again. Her story wasn't just about surviving, it was about rising. And for the first time in her life, Elise truly believed. The best was yet to come. The night of the Bright Futures Awards Gala arrived with more buzz and anticipation than any event of the season. The venue was bigger than before, an iconic glass-roofed pavilion sparkling with city lights. The guest list was tighter, the security stricter, and the stakes higher. It wasn't just a party, it was the showdown the city had been whispering about for weeks. Reporters lined the entrance, eager for a story. Mark, dressed in a new custom tuxedo, led Veronica through the flashbulbs, playing the power couple for the cameras. But beneath his bravado was a gnawing anxiety. For all his boasting, Mark knew tonight was different. His phone buzzed with warnings. Elise was coming, and she wouldn't be alone. Sponsors, investors, and even old friends were openly curious. Which Ashcroft would walk out of this gala with the city's loyalty, and which would leave in disgrace? Elise arrived late, but her timing was flawless. She stepped from a sleek black car, flanked by Lucian Westcott on one side and her foundation's board chair, a world-renowned activist on the other. But she didn't need an entourage to steal the spotlight. Her sapphire suit, striking makeup, and fearless smile made every head turn. And as she entered the pavilion, even the most jaded socialites could feel the air shift. Inside, the tension was electric. Mark tried to ignore the glances, but Veronica's nervousness was impossible to hide. Whispers swept the room as Elise made her way through the crowd. People who once dismissed her now rushed to shake her hand or snag a selfie. The old order was crumbling, and everyone could sense it. The evening's main event was a live charity auction, a signature of the Bright Futures Gala, always hosted by Mark. This year, however, the committee had insisted on a co-host. As the lights dimmed, Mark stepped onto the stage, forcing a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight," he began. "It's my honor to introduce my co-host and the visionary behind the Future Leaders Initiative, Elise Linton." A burst of applause greeted Elise as she joined him under the spotlights. Mark offered a handshake. Elise met it with steady composure, her eyes never leaving his. The symbolism wasn't lost on the crowd. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled furiously, and even Lucien, watching from the VIP section, nodded in silent approval. "Thank you, Mark," Elise said, voice strong and clear. "Tonight isn't just about raising money. It's about owning our future, together. Let's remember, true leadership isn't about ego or legacy. It's about lifting others, especially when it's hardest to do." The audience erupted. The contrast between Mark's empty platitudes and Elise's authentic conviction was obvious to everyone. The auction began, but the real drama was yet to come. As Mark struggled to keep the audience engaged, Elise excelled, joking with donors, explaining the real-world impact of each bid, even coaxing a record donation from a famously stingy tech billionaire. Every interaction showed Elise's confidence and intelligence. The crowd adored her. Then, as the last item was bid on, a mentorship lunch with the Future Leaders Initiative's founder, Elise made her move. She took the mic, scanning the crowd until her gaze landed on Mark and Veronica. "I'd like to invite someone up here who believes in second chances," Elise announced. Her voice was even, but the edge was unmistakable. "Someone who taught me that sometimes, in losing what you thought you wanted most, you discover what you really needed all along." For a moment, Mark's face went white. Veronica squeezed his arm, hissing, "Don't you dare go up there." But the crowd, hungry for a scene, began to chant Mark's name. Backed into a corner, he stumbled onto the stage. Elise met him center stage. The cameras zoomed in tight. "Mark, you and I have shared a history," she began, her words clear and direct. "We've both made mistakes. I know I have. But tonight, I want to thank you." Mark blinked, unsure whether this was some trap or public absolution. "Thank me?" he stammered. "Yes," Elise said, "because you taught me that real power doesn't come from controlling a narrative or another person. It comes from believing in yourself, even when the world doubts you." She turned to the audience, her voice gaining force. "We all face betrayal, humiliation, and loss at some point. But it's what we do after, how we rise, how we rebuild, that truly defines us. No one gets to write your story but you." The crowd exploded in applause. Mark stood frozen, unable to reply, while Veronica slipped quietly away, face burning red. Elise held her ground a moment longer, letting the applause wash over her. She glanced at Mark one final time, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "You compared me to royalty," she said quietly, only for him. "But you never saw the crown I was already wearing." With that, she stepped forward, taking her place beside Lucien and her board chair. The press clamored for interviews. Sponsors pledged support. The tide had turned for good. Mark watched from the shadows as Elise was swarmed by admirers and reporters. For the first time, he understood. He hadn't lost Elise to Lucien or to circumstance. He'd lost her to her own growth. The empire he built on arrogance and secrets was crumbling, while the woman he'd discarded now stood as a beacon for others. The reckoning was public and final. No amount of money, PR spin, or new romance could undo what the world had seen. Mark and Veronica exposed, Elise triumphant. The city would remember this night as the one where real power changed hands, and a queen reclaimed her throne. As the last echoes of applause faded, Elise found herself standing at the center of a world she had reshaped. The Bright Futures Gala had ended, but its impact was just beginning to ripple outward. The press clamor softened into respectful silence as Elise stepped back to the podium one final time. Every eye on her, not as a victim or a wife, but as a leader who had taken her pain and turned it into purpose. She paused, scanning the room, seeing not just powerful men and socialites, but also the young interns at the edge of the crowd, the women who'd come alone, the staff who watched with quiet pride. Elise saw herself in all of them, a little uncertain, a little hopeful, searching for a place to belong. Tonight, she belonged everywhere. "I know this night will be remembered for the spectacle," she began, her voice steady and warm. "Maybe some of you came here hoping for drama, or a scandal, or a headline that would last a week." A soft, knowing laugh rippled through the crowd. "But I hope you remember something else." She took a breath, glancing down at her rounded belly, her child's future echoing in her heart. "For years, I let other people decide my worth. I let their opinions, their judgments, even their betrayals, shape how I saw myself. I thought I had to be perfect, to never fail, to never make noise. When my marriage ended, when my heart broke in front of all of you, I thought it was the end of my story." She let the words settle. The silence was attentive, not empty. "But I learned something," Elise continued. "You cannot let anyone, not a husband, not a boss, not the world, decide your value. You decide. Every scar, every setback, every tear, and every sleepless night, they are not weaknesses. They are the steel that forges your crown." Her eyes found the women in the audience, the servers, the assistants, the overlooked daughters of powerful men. Some of you are fighting battles nobody sees. Maybe you've been underestimated, betrayed, pushed aside, or told you weren't enough. Maybe you've been made to feel small so someone else could feel big. I want you to know none of that defines you. Only you do. She glanced at Lucian, at Mia, at the board members and old friends who now stood with her, stronger than ever. Tonight is not about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about choosing yourself. Every single day, no matter how hard it gets. You get to rewrite your story as many times as you need to. You get to be the hero, not the sidekick or the footnote. Elise's words reverberated, even to those who'd never known betrayal, but understood the pressure to be perfect, to never show cracks in the armor. We need to stop telling women they are weak for feeling, or for breaking down, or for having moments of doubt. You are not weak. You are human. And being human is the bravest thing you can be. The room filled with a hush that felt sacred. Even Mark and Veronica, now on the fringes, were forced to hear her, not as a target, but as a testament to their own limitations. For any woman listening, whether you're here in this room or watching online, know that your worth is not decided by who loves you or leaves you, not by what you lose, but by what you choose to build. I stand here tonight, not because I was never broken, but because I decided to put myself back together, stronger and wiser. She smiled, soft and sincere, a look that held no bitterness, only hope and conviction. To every woman who's ever been left behind, overlooked, or told to stay quiet, stand tall. Wear your scars with pride. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who refuses to give up on herself. That is real royalty. The applause grew, not polite or performative, but thunderous, carrying the weight of truth and the relief of shared experience. For once, this room of power brokers and society stars felt united by something deeper than money or status. Elise had given them more than a story. She'd given them permission to be brave. After the gala, women approached Elise with tearful hugs and whispered thank yous. Young men shook her hand, saying she'd inspired their mothers, their sisters, their daughters. Reporters quoted her message around the world. Overnight, her speech became a viral anthem, a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever felt small. Mark, standing in the shadows, realized that Elise had given him a gift he'd never given her: honesty, closure, and a path forward, if he chose to take it. Even Veronica, once so sure of her power, now looked humbled, perhaps realizing that true strength could not be stolen or borrowed. But the real legacy was not in headlines or hashtags. It was in the way Elise left the stage, with her head high, her back straight, and her future finally her own. She walked out into the cool night, hand on her belly, a mother and a leader, ready for whatever storms might come next. She'd started this journey lost, broken, and betrayed. She ended it unbreakable. She knew she could never promise her child a world without pain or disappointment. But she could promise this: they would see their mother rise again and again, never shrinking from her truth. And to anyone still listening, Elise had one final message, simple but powerful. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Never confuse heartbreak for defeat. Women are not fragile, they are the storm. With those words, Elise stepped forward into the night, not just as a survivor, but as a queen who had claimed her crown, her story, and her future. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with us? If you've stayed until now, I truly believe this story has touched your heart in some way. Maybe you saw yourself in Elise, or maybe you just felt the fire of someone finally standing up for themselves after being pushed aside. Here's what I hope you carry from this journey. Nobody, no matter their power, status, or words, gets to decide your worth except you. Healing isn't about never being broken. It's about putting yourself back together, stronger and wiser than before. As the heterodox wisdom goes, a broken heart is an open door. to compassion, to strength, and to new beginnings. Your scars are not shame. They are proof of your survival and your ability to love deeply, even when hurt. So, if this story made you feel braver or just a little less alone, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below. What part hit you the hardest? Remember, you're not fragile. You are the storm.